Thank you all. Now you might want to have a bit of a stretch. Don't leave, of course. Here comes Campbell. He's going to join us for the panel. So the panel discussion is a question and answer, as Campbell just did at the previous one. It's Campbell, Roger, and Steve. There's Steve. Oh, now if you all go, I'll have to make you sit up front. All right, so we've got a couple of microphones. Now, Campbell, is there anything that you particularly want people to turn their minds to?
So look, this was really an opportunity to have a talk about regional scale predator control rollout. So if you've got big projects, or you're contemplating setting one, or you've already in the process of rolling out a large project, it was a chance to talk about any aspects of that, but also for us to perhaps hear what you're doing as well. But equally, if you're considering regional rollout in that context, while we're very early in that sort of setting, we certainly have built as a team some thoughts around that as well. So hey, it was an open discussion and a chance to ask questions.
So if you put your hands up, please don't shout out, but we've got somebody here with microphones and I'll tap. Anyone want to start off? There's somebody on the left, just there. And then I see this gentleman here.
So as we're rolling towards the end of this seminar process, I've been sort of quite keen to find out how you are managing the iwi part of the process, because I work for a settled iwi over in the Manawatu, and we went through a process a wee while ago looking at what benefit it is to the iwi to support a process like this. Like, do we get a financial benefit? Do we get interactive benefit? And certainly in the Cape City one, it's very hard for me, and I'm not sure how the tangata whenua over here might manage it, but to see the benefit to the iwi, because they are, you're going to roll out a predator program on private land where they will get the benefit from having enhanced land values, from having it, you know, greater biodiversity and a whole heap of stuff. But essentially it'll be iwi that will have to support the sign-off at a number of political levels, through DOC, through the regional council process. So how are you managing the iwi input and the iwi involvement, both on the ground and at the managerial level in this project?
Thank you for that question. Who wants to start?
Oh, I'm happy to. So I think there's a few things there for me. The first thing is that Maori are absolutely critical to the actual rollout of large-scale ecological restoration for a whole bunch of reasons, including their long-term cultural holistic view of the environment, and that's effectively where we need to get to. If we want to get down to talking more about Cape City, I said right at the start of the conference, there's some things I thought we could have done better and we would do differently second time around. And really, when you look at Cape City, it's actually in quite a different phase of Maori engagement or hapu engagement than, say, for example, Paukari o Tāne is. And so Cape City, Maori are involved at the governance level. They're on the project team, so they're involved in day-to-day decision making, literally, and they're on the community advisory groups. And so in terms of a structural sense, they're absolutely in that whole part of the project. Your question around what's in it for them, look, I'm not going to presume to speak for Maori in particular, but my experience so far of their engagement into the project is that recognising that in many cases treaty settlements are a significant priority at the moment, they are very interested in the environment and restoring the environment and restoring the Maori and things like that that relate to that ecological restoration context. So that's been my experience to date, but we actually haven't got that. There's parts of that, if I was to do this again, we would have resourced it very differently right at the start. We would have probably put 20% of our resources into engagement with Maori right at the start, and that would be just a simple recognition that they're such a critical partner. But to be frank, it's actually, there's an effort to engage effectively with Maori, and that takes time as well as resources.
Okay, thanks, Campbell. Gentlemen, any other additional comments?
Oh, just a brief one from me in that for reasons that I'm not quite sure why, the initial social survey that Becky Niemack conducted in Cape City didn't at all represent Maori views particularly well, and I think we'll have to make sure the next time it's done that is done better. So I think that was definitely a missing piece of information initially.
I guess in Taranaki we, a bit like Campbell, we probably should have done things a wee bit differently at the start. That said, we've tried to engage in the Waifakaia area that I've talked about. We've engaged with Te Aotearoa there and talked to their staff and tried to be talking with them about, because that's their rohi area. I guess one of the good things that we've got in Taranaki is the Taranaki Monga project. They have all of the iwi engaged at the board level. So while the landscape scale predator stuff is not directly a Taranaki Monga project thing, you know, we're working quite closely together. So hopefully we can build on that relationship that they have through the iwi chairs group directly on their board, and we can build on the relationship there to move us forward.
Okay, thank you. I think there was one in the front here. This gentleman right here. Sorry, right here, he was next.
Yep.
Put some hands up in the back so I can keep track of them, please. Who's? Yes, there. Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm from the Kapiti Coast, and one of the things we've got is we've got a lot of groups that are working together to do predator control, but we've also got major corridors going through, including State Highway 1 and the main trunk railway line. And the new expressway is a very wide area that's been planted. But we've gone to NZTA and they're not interested in the slightest in doing predator control along it. And we've already noticed that predators are coming down the highway from areas like we're getting ferrets into the southern end of the Kapiti Coast, which we never had before. So what my question is, and maybe it's not as relevant to your area, but in our areas we have government agencies or, you know, semi-government agencies, airports, all sorts of things, where their aim is not predator control, their aim is entirely, and we cannot get them on board. And it's not only predators, I mean, that's where all the pampas grows, the Cape Ivy's coming in. So until we get those agencies on board, we're sort of stuffed.
Sounds like the question is how to get the slackers on board.
I guess I agree with you, and they are really important vectors that, or transport links that you need to be taken care of. I guess on the predator control point, you're just going to have to keep working with them and engaging with them. But I guess as the whole landscape projects end up developing, you know, they're going to have to be involved and they're going to have to work with the people doing that. As far as your other pest species, if I put my regional council regulatory hat on, you know, there's a good neighbour rules just about to come out with new RPMPs, and so Taranaki is quite a compliance-based pest control biosecurity council. So we would be issuing, you know, notices to transit rail to get them to do that. So yeah, that's the legal way that you can actually do it. For the predator control, I think you just have to work with them because there's no legislative way to actually get them involved at the moment.
There's a little bit of ecology that's relevant, at least in the case of rats, in that a lot of the vegetation that's planted along highways, that low-level shrubby vegetation, is ideal habitat for rats. So they're providing fantastic rat habitat. On the other hand, some recent work in Auckland's shown that a well-lit multi-lane highway is quite a good barrier for rodents. So that's something you might be able to take advantage of.
Okay, I think there was a question right there behind that gentleman. Yep, right there. Is it you, sir? Yes. Yep.
Thanks.
Who else is up next?
Graham Butcher from Greater Wellington. Probably Steve, Camp and Campbell, just want to talk a little bit about motivation of the public and landowners out there that we're dealing with. Probably coming from the Wellington region, we've had a TB-free program running since the 70s, mid-70s, really ramping up in the 80s and early 90s and whatnot. And in reality, a lot of farmers have been spoon-fed possum control, what they want almost, for the last 10 to 15 years. now as TB3 moves out, the regional council doesn't have the funding available that Osprey did to put in there. So there's going to be a sort of motivating factor, and some of the people that we're now dealing with, you know, the sons of farmers and that, where these guys didn't have the TB problem. They haven't seen the possum numbers that were around on their Father's Day and stuff like that. And some people are starting to, wanting to reject possum control as we move in there with a regional program. And our program's going to double again within the next couple of years, and it's just going to get bigger as TB3 moves out, you know. And we really need to keep on top of that. Plus some of the other stuff, the biodiversity stuff that we've talked about over the last day and a half has been really great as to how we can sort of change direction. But I'm just wondering about a motivational factor with the landowners out there. And I say, given that, Campbell, you have a 75% buy-in before it becomes, and then it goes ahead. What about that 25% or up to 25% that don't buy in? Because it's easy enough to go in there year one, be a bit regulatory.
Thank you. Yep, we got the question, thank you.
Yeah, so how do we go from there?
So Butch, I think there's a couple of things in there for me. The first thing is that in terms of our regional pest management plan, once the 75% trigger is made, everyone's in, like it or lump it. And that's a collective community decision. And for those 25, and actually, frankly, we got 85 to 95% sign-up rates across our 50-odd PCAs as we went and did it. But for the very small percentage that wouldn't commit or actually said they would but then wouldn't end up doing the work, then there is a compliance pathway. And that's about us actually working that through with them. But the end result potentially is council doing the work and sending the bill. Now that's extremely rare, but it's a bottom line around credibility of the program, where the majority know that a few can't opt out and compromise the overall result. So for us, in terms of the motivational factors though, really what's interesting to us is that when we did a survey in 2006 of our PCA program, it was about 1,000 properties on it at that stage. What was interesting in that survey, that around a third of the farmers said their motivation was actually biodiversity related. A large chunk had TB risk reduction as their reason for being involved in possum control, but a good number actually had biodiversity. So I think in the end you'll find there's a range of motivations, but keeping the risk of TB low long term, once it's gone from the actual area, doesn't mean to say it can't come back in 10 or 15 years' time if possums are back and it's not eradicated from the country. It just comes in on a truck like ours in New Zealand. So those sorts of things are still motivations for them. Yeah.
Okay. Anything on this side? Yes, over there. Yep.
Yeah, just interested with the focus on the possum and ultimately probably the rat's our number one negative effect on biodiversity, and why there hasn't been that total engagement with that. And I'm just wondering whether as a group we need to really, it's a struggle for a lot of councils to fund more into that area of predator control, and perhaps there is a need for more lobbying at a national level for funding. Would that change your approach to not really including the rat at the moment?
I think, from Tawanaki's point of view, we're not looking at including rats because our landscape wouldn't let us do it at that huge landscape scale. We've got 360 odd rivers coming off the Maori, all the way through our ring plane, and I don't think we could look at rats at landscape scale right now. What we are doing is we're increasing our site-led areas. So we have a key native ecosystem program which basically looks at the values of a site with voluntary, this is voluntary with farmers, and if rats are the main threat to whatever the values are, then we will look at reducing rats down to as low as we can get them, basically. And the farmers maintain that. So rather than do that on the full landscape scale, we're looking at connecting our biodiversity site-led stuff so there will be pockets of really low rats throughout that landscape. I just don't think we're ready to go rats on a rural landscape just yet.
I think one thing that's looking a bit more hopeful for rat control is a highly promising rat-specific toxin. It's been highly effective and safe in laboratory trials. It's close to becoming available. It might be a year or two, but it's not much longer than that. And if it all works out well, that could be a game changer for controlling rats in areas where there are other animals that you want to not to be affected by the toxin. So that's the sort of technology that might change the game a little bit.
Okay, I think Davor, you had your hand up. Let me see it go in the back.
Practical question for Campbell. Did you ever have to go down the regulatory pathway with the farmers in your possum control areas? The non-compliant ones, or you opted for circling them with, the other option, circling them with gear and basically preventing their exacerbation of the issue that way?
We have.
No, that's what you do.
So I was going to ask Steve how many notices his team issued last year of direction for possum control.
Oh, so out of our 4,000 odd farms on our self-help possum program, I think we issued about 18 nods last year, and we haven't gone to act on default for quite a long time. The legislative stuff, the powers that we get to act on default are actually quite powerful. So we'll do a job, we'll send them a bill for $3,000 or $4,000. If they don't pay, every 6 months, 10% on top, 10% on top, 10% on top. They end up with quite a large bill if they don't pay. And if they don't pay, it goes on their title and they can't sell their property until they've paid off the bill. So nobody wants to do that. We've only done it a few times, but you've got to be prepared to do it.
So our context, across a few thousand farmers, we would have issued less than a dozen notices of direction in the last 5 years, and only one of those has come close to acting on default, and it didn't in the end.
Okay. There's a gentleman back there with his hand up right there, and then there's a lady in the back.
A question for both Hawke's Bay and Taranaki. It's been a great conference, and we've looked at all the opportunities and challenges for regional large-scale predator control. And there's a few issues out there. What's your main thing that you worry about as you roll out with your own programs? What's your biggest headache? What keeps you awake at night with this stuff, of all the challenges you have?
It's a great question, and I talked to a few people during lunches. I think my biggest concern about rolling this out is Predator Free can give me $1 million tomorrow, I can get traps out on the ground. That's easy. But if in 3 or 4 years' time those traps are not being maintained by farmers, then they're just rubbish on the landscape. And so I think we need to actually start off by working with people who are keen and get them engaged, but we need to be doing a lot more work on changing the normal. So getting people thinking about doing predator control or pest control just like they think about putting their recycling out on a Tuesday morning. And I think we need to do a lot of that up front and figure out, using the social science, using all the skills that people have, to get that working. Otherwise, my biggest fear is we'll put $1 million worth of rubbish on the ground, and nobody wants to see that happen.
Okay, thank you. Just lady right back there. Anybody over here?
Hi, Marie McEntee, social scientist. Although I should say, one thing I want to say just about social science is there are as many social scientists and types of social scientists as there are scientists. So just be careful, that's all. There's plenty of us that you probably wouldn't want to have in your projects. But I'd want to ask you, how much do you discuss uncertainty with your communities? How much do you tell them about particularly the uncertainties in science around a lot of the things you do, and how honest and transparent are you? Or are you going out there with it's going to work, or it's,
I think we need to discuss the risks and the uncertainties right up front. There's no point going into this with your eyes half closed. We need to be identifying what those uncertainties are, what the risks to success are, and I think that's part of the initial conversation. So I think that's really important that we do that.
And I'd agree. And I'd also say that in our context, you'll find virtually all of our research on our website. And actually, if you do dive into that and start having a look at some of those research articles, you'll see there's a number of things discussed around risk and uncertainty. So it's there, and we definitely have that conversation. And a really good example of that is rabbits. Like, we don't believe on the basis of the research that rabbits will be a significant issue for most of New Zealand if you release predators, because predators aren't suppressing their numbers, it's other things which drive rapid explosions of population. But we are absolutely certain of that. And so what we need to do is make sure we go in with our eyes open with good research programs as we're going and learning before we upscale significantly.
And I think, just to add to that, we need to do that for the main community, but we also need to highlight what the risks are to potential funders, so they know what they're getting into. They know that the investment that they're putting in is not foolproof, but they also know that, and in our case, we've tried to design our program that even if after a couple of years we decide this isn't working, that we've got some really good gains, and we want to be explaining that right the way through.
Okay, there's a question right behind. Yep.
Yeah, hi Campbell and Steve. Both your councils have applied the rollout, large-scale control, but I'm aware that some other councils still have site-led sort of program. So are they behind the game, or is their approach equally effective?
Loaded question, Mr. Warburton.
Watch them pass it back and forth. That'll be good.
No, I'll have a crack. Absolutely. Mate, so I think we need to be really clear when we're talking about wide-scale predator control. That's a landscape blanket level of control to drive a certain level of outcome. There is always going to be a need across New Zealand at certain sites for more intensive control on different things to drive the outcomes you want to at that site. So we're not talking about exclusivity here. It's one and the other, not exclusive. Yep.
Steve, no? Nothing?
Campbell's right. There's horses for courses, and each council has their own political will or desire to do whatever they're doing. I think in Taranaki and Hawke's Bay, where we landed, we've had relationships with farmers for a long, long time across the landscape. So we were early getting into landscape. So we can use those relationships and the infrastructure that we've built over 20 and 17, whatever years together to actually add predator control to it. It's going to be harder for other regions. But yeah, let them see how they want to do it.
Anybody on this side of the room? Been a little bit quiet over here. All right. Oh, no, I'll ask one for you. Sorry, you were too late. Campbell, so you used the word outcomes there. So my question is, this is about regional rollout. Are these regional programs linked to specific regional outcomes, as in X change in bird density, X weta populations?
So for us, we've got our regional biodiversity strategy and
Yep.
implementation, which you heard about yesterday from Charles.
Yep.
And they've got some quite defined outcomes over time that we're seeking to get as a region together. And so the predator control, because Cape City is 26,000 hectares, sure. So clearly it's not operating at a regional level yet. But as we roll things out, there is absolutely the intention to align the outcomes from that sort of work with what we're seeking in the regional biodiversity implementation. Yep.
Great. Okay, great. Questions? I cut you off. Yes, right there.
Yeah, Nick Hancock's from Osprey working on the TB program, and I'd just like to go back to your ability to successfully roll out a large program. And it seems to be, and we've got two very different things have happened. In Hawke's Bay, it seems to me you achieved a very seamless transition from the TB program to your own regional program. Taranaki, you just did it yourselves without it being on the back of a TB program. So I guess the first question is, looking at Hawke's Bay and the effectiveness of that transition, are there any messages for other parts of the country as the TB control program does scale back in other regions?
So I think Steve summed it up when he said every region is going to have different drivers around funding and so on. But my direct comment to that, Nick, would be that we had an extremely good relationship with Osprey. And when things ceased with you guys, it automatically came over to our possum control program. And that was pre-agreed by the community about 15 years ago. And that was on the basis that we wanted to protect the long-term investment that had been made by them as a farming community through their TB levy substantially, and the ongoing gains they're going to get. So for us, as a mechanism, that worked. And my comment to other councils and to Osprey would be that where that regional context sits in terms of Osprey going to exit over the next 5 years, and you're sitting there as a regional council and thinking, well, actually, what should we do? you should be having a conversation around how might that transition happen. Do you want to go that way as a regional council? Do you want to fund it? But for us, it worked very well. Yep.
Sorry, Davor, there's one in the very back of the room. Gentleman up against the wall there.
Thank you. Hey guys, more one for Campbell, I think. Earlier on in one of your talks, you spoke about the using less Britificum. I'm just sort of concerned about the impact that will have on rat numbers, by-kill from the Britificum, and also if it's been looked at, the secondary kills from, the secondary poisoning from that, with predators eating rats and dead possums.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, look, that's a really interesting comment, Jake, and it's good you brought it up. So for us as a region, we use somewhere between 10 and 12 tonnes of Britificum in a farmland context per annum on our possum control program. And that's in bait stations, so it's absolutely to the label instructions and best practice and all that stuff. And there's no doubt in our minds, while it's not on a sort of a prescriptive 1 per 1 hectare or 2 hectare bait station basis, so it's not at the normal formula you'd expect to see for getting high quality rat control, we are reasonably certain that it does have an impact on rat numbers. And we say that because across literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trap catch and other monitoring lines over the course of 15 years, we've noticed in areas where there's significant Britificum use, there is a lower non-target catch for rats, and there are also other, what we think at least anecdotally, non-target impacts on things like mustelids. So in short, it could have some reduction in the overall, at least marginal suppression we might be getting of rats, but fundamentally for us, we think that Britificum use long term is something we prefer to reduce our reliance on.
Okay, Steve, do you want to anything?
Same thing. So we were quite late getting into Britificum in Taranaki, and we really only got there when the licensing requirements for the other vertebrate toxic agents reduced farmers' ability to use those chemicals. But similar to Campbell, when our site-led guys go in and start monitoring, looking for these threats to those values in those little sites, they're finding, some places they're not even tracking any rodents at all. And the only thing we can put that down to is the use of Brody in those areas. Stopping it could have an impact. I think the thing is we need more tools.
Okay, looking for questions. It's not that I don't like you, Davor. You've already had one. I'm just looking. I'll come back if there's no other takers. No, you're going to let Davor? Oh, there's somebody there. No. All right, hang on, right there, and then.
I'm just wondering if we might have a small creative tension between a couple of threads. One is we've heard it reinforced every presentation, the absolute importance of engagement and that enthusiastic sign-up. And I think perhaps across the agencies and across the farming community, there is a huge level of enthusiasm. But alongside that, there's a little thread that says, but if you don't play, we'll make you. And another perhaps small creative tension between another very strong theme, which is about getting really smart and efficient about our targeting, vis-a-vis, again, one for all and all for one, and you've got to be in, and if you don't all play, then we're going to make you. So I just wonder if, in the first instance, the grounded conversations with communities in the place, appreciating, Roger, that your model in the first instance, it was, just averaged the density across the thing and then posed the question, what if this one or that one don't play? But I think it's really important to keep those discussions real and grounded in the better quality information about those spatial temporal predator patterns, so that we're targeting those investments and then having the conversation about, okay guys, how do we share the costs and responsibilities of getting the job done in the most efficient and effective manner.
Thank you. Yep.
So, hey, I would agree with, agree with what you're saying. I guess just come back to your point though about the tension between the conversation about community engagement and involvement and then it being a compliance context on some of this. And look, the reason for that was, and it came out in Becky's Nemec's work, but it's come out over the course of the last 15 years. Most farmers are very, very supportive of this idea of predator control and or possum control. And we effectively demonstrated that by signing up, 85, 95% of farmers across areas. But the reality is that for some people, once they have said they participate, if they choose then not to participate and they compromise their neighbours, is that equitable when they've signed on to it in the bottom line? So the compliance thing, you've got to keep it in context. Compliance is absolutely a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. If you're doing it to anything more than an incredibly small percentage of your overall people that are involved in your programs, you're probably missing the mark. But it needs to be there in some programs as a bottom line, and pest control is one example for farmland, because people can't afford to opt out and compromise a long-term investment and the community's commitment to that.
Okay, thank you. So Tim, you're going to have the last question, so the pressure is to make it both short, engaging, and summarizing.
There's been...
And
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
No pressure. I'm really interested in your comments and thoughts on the pathway to eradication for possums from current suppression in both Taranaki and Hawke's Bay.
I think...
Short engagement.
Yes.
Yeah.
The question was short, I'm not sure about the answer.
Yeah, I think that Taranaki farmers are ready to make that leap. I think the predator-free discussion that's happening, is encouraging all of that. And I think our landscape lends itself, like the map I showed of where we're looking to go. That first block, I think, is protectable. We have long-lasting relationships with the people in there. The community that's on the corner there, Awakuta Township, like I said, that's where all the rich people live. But it's also, they're already coming to us saying, we want to be predator-free, like a lot of communities are. So I actually think making the leap is going to need a lot of engagement with the farming community and there's those urban people. But I actually think Taranaki's ready for it. And if we can show that, yes, this can be done, and if we can show that the recipe that Zip have been trialling and seems to be working, can reduce that 1080 on the monga, hey, it's a win-win. So I think we're ready, and I think it's the next natural step for us.
I'd add to that one thing, in that technically we have the tools now to show eradication. So if you think about it, demonstrating eradication isn't a trivial thing to do. I mean, how many times have you got to get no captures of possums, no detections of possums before you're confident? And a lot of it at the moment is pretty much seat of the pants stuff. But we know now how to do that quantitatively. We've got very good at it. We know that we know how to analyse data from eradications on islands and so on. We can put a number on it. And we've got the tools, we've got the techniques, the statistical techniques, so that if you want to be sure, 99% sure you've eradicated a species from an area, we know how to do it.
It's a term from my point of view. Ultimately, we're already spending a lot of money on possum control, whether it's maintenance, sustained over a long time or whatever it is. If we can find a way using the sorts of tools that Zip are working on right now to effectively eradicate and then hold the line in a way which is relatively low cost, because eradication doesn't mean to say there's no cost long term. You've still got the cost of holding the line because you won't have it done all. You've still got the cost of your actual surveillance or incursion detection stuff. But if we can find a way to actually do that, the reality is that the one-off investment for eradication is going to be a big investment. And I don't think it's just going to be our regional communities alone making that. It'll be a combination of regional communities, central government, business and philanthropic players. But if we can do that initial investment, then actually the already existing long-term maintenance cost for possum control can be switched to an eradication, long-term maintenance of eradication, if you like. Well, that's probably not very good words. Yeah.
Okay, that was a good question. It was a good kind of summary question. Two things before I go. One is to encourage you to come back after tea. There's a number of good talks, including one about perversity, which sounds like fun. And the second is to thank all of our speakers who were both informative and, from my perspective, they were punctual, which I really appreciate. So thank you very much.